Hey, welcome back to Truth and Tarmac. I'm glad you're here, because today we're going into something that I genuinely believe is the most important political story of 2026. And honestly, it's a story that most mainstream outlets are telling wrong. Here's the thing. Everywhere you look right now, the political conversation feels broken. People on the right and the left are angrier than ever. Trust in institutions is at an all-time low. And yet, the strangest thing is happening underneath all that noise. Both political parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, are basically making the same pitch to the American voter. They're both saying, the system is rigged, the elites have failed you, I'm the outsider who can fix it. That's populism. And right now, in 2026, it is absolutely dominating American politics. But here's the twist, and this is what we're going to dig into today. Populism isn't new. It's been simmering in this country for decades. What is new is that it has now completely swallowed both parties. It's reshaping who runs for office, and it's setting up what could be one of the most consequential midterm elections in a generation. We're going to break down what anti-establishment populism actually is, where it came from, who's riding it, and most importantly, what it means for you, for your wallet, and for the future of this country. So grab your coffee, strap in, and let's get into it. Before we go any further, let's make sure we're all on the same page about what we mean when we say populism, because it's one of those words that gets thrown around constantly without anyone stopping to explain what it actually means. At its core, populism is a political approach that frames the world as a battle between two groups, ordinary, hard-working people, the many, and a corrupt, out-of-touch elite, the few. The populist politician says, I speak for you, the people, against them, the powerful, the wealthy, the connected. Now, this framing is as old as democracy itself, but anti-establishment populism specifically targets political institutions and the political class. It's not just about wealth inequality. It's about the feeling that the people running government, both parties, have become their own separate class with their own separate interests, and they no longer represent regular Americans. Here's a stat that should stop you cold. According to a major international survey conducted by Ipsos across 28 countries, 65% of Americans agreed that their country is broken. That's not a fringe view. That's nearly 2/3 of the country. And it doesn't stop there. 66% of Americans said the country's economy is rigged to advantage the rich and powerful. 65% said traditional parties and politicians don't care about people like them. And an extraordinary 69% agreed that the political and economic elite simply don't care about hard-working people. Let that sink in. Nearly 7 in 10 Americans believe the people running this country don't care about them. That is an extraordinary collapse of trust, and it is the soil in which populism grows. Now, there are actually two flavors of populism worth knowing about. The first is what scholars call anti-establishment populism. It's rooted in democratic ideals, rejects the ruling elites, and champions the will of ordinary people and more direct political representation. The second is authoritarian populism, which is more about strong leadership, majority rule, and sometimes subverting the very democratic institutions that put the leader in power. What we're seeing in America in 2026 is a messy, fascinating collision of both, and it's playing out differently on the right and the left. To understand why populism is dominating politics in 2026, you have to understand how we got here. And this story really starts about 20 years ago. After the George W. Bush years, the Iraq War, Hurricane Katrina, and then the catastrophic 2008 financial crisis, public trust in American institutions absolutely cratered. We're talking about it dropping to 15% in some surveys. 15%! Think about that. Out of every 100 Americans, only 15 trusted the government to do the right thing. Enter Barack Obama, who, if you remember, ran explicitly as an outsider. He was the fresh face, the senator from Illinois who wasn't part of the old Washington machinery. He offered hope that the system could be reformed from within, and for a while, a lot of people believed him. But by the end of his 2 terms, the cynicism hadn't gone away. Wall Street had been bailed out. No major bankers went to jail for causing the financial crisis. Income inequality kept growing, and millions of Americans felt like nothing had fundamentally changed for them. That frustration didn't disappear. It fermented, and then in 2016 it exploded on both sides. On the left, Bernie Sanders came shockingly close to winning the Democratic nomination by running an explicitly anti-establishment, anti-billionaire campaign. On the right, Donald Trump blew past 16 experienced Republican politicians by promising to blow up Washington entirely. Both were channeling the same underlying rage, just pointing it in different directions. But here's the crucial thing that's happened since then. Trump didn't end populism. He mainstreamed it. He showed both parties that this is what voters want. And now, a decade later, the populist wave hasn't receded. If anything, it's stronger than ever. So what is actually fueling this rage in 2026? The answer is simple, painful, and very real. People cannot afford their lives. Forget ideology for a second. Forget left versus right. When you look at what's actually driving Americans to the polling booth in anger, it comes down to the basic cost of living. Groceries, rent, gas, healthcare, the things you need every single day just to survive. Polling from early 2026 paints a bleak picture. A majority of Americans, over 50%, say they are only spending money on daily necessities. 50%. We're not talking about cutting back on vacations or new cars. We're talking about people who are only buying the basics. And nearly half of Americans say they are pulling money out of savings just to cover their regular expenses. Savings that many of them spent years building up, being eroded month by month just to keep the lights on and food on the table. It gets worse. The majority of Americans believe the country is already in a recession, even though technically, by the economic definition, it isn't. But here's the thing. The gap between what economists say and what people feel at the grocery store is itself a political story. When people are told the economy is doing fine, but their paycheck doesn't stretch as far as it used to, that's not a math problem, that's a trust problem. And it feeds directly into the anti-establishment narrative. The people in charge are lying to you. They live in a different world. They don't feel what you feel. And who's taking the political hit for this? President Trump, whose economic approval rating has fallen to just 31%, a dramatic number for a president in his second term. Promises were made about lowering costs. Those promises have not been kept, and voters have noticed.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. And this is the part I want you to pay close attention to, because this is what sets 2026 apart from any previous political moment. For the first time in modern American history, both major political parties are running on a populist platform simultaneously. But they've taken the populist pitchfork, that image of the angry crowd, and they've pointed it in completely different directions. The targets are different, the villains are different, the solutions are different. But the anger, the frustration, the sense that the system is broken, that is universal. Let's break down each side. The right-wing version, Trump's America. On the right, the populist enemy is the liberal establishment, the deep state, the mainstream media, academic and cultural elites on the coasts, and immigrants, who Trump's base blames for taking jobs, straining resources, and changing the cultural fabric of America. In his recent State of the Union address, Trump continued to frame his political mission as a battle on behalf of the forgotten man and woman, the blue-collar worker who has been left behind by globalization and coastal elites who don't understand or respect their way of life. Trump's brand of populism is potent because it combines economic grievance with cultural identity. It tells a certain group of Americans, particularly working-class white voters without college degrees, that their problems have a clear cause and a clear enemy. And the very fact that every elite institution, from universities to newspapers to Hollywood to Silicon Valley, seems to oppose Trump makes him more appealing to his base. Being hated by the establishment is the brand. But there's a contradiction at the heart of MAGA populism that's becoming harder to ignore in 2026. The very elites that Trump promised to overthrow, the billionaire class, are now sitting at the heart of his administration. Figures like Elon Musk have become central players in the Trump government. The revolt of the people has, in practice, elevated a new set of billionaires to replace the old establishment. Critics call this musculinarchy, a new economic elite, deeply loyal to Trump, quietly consolidating power. That's not what the forgotten man and woman voted for, and they're starting to notice. The left-wing version, the new democratic populism. On the Democratic side, something genuinely fascinating is happening. After years of the party being led by centrist, corporate-friendly politicians, the Clinton and Obama model of working with Wall Street rather than against it, a new generation of explicitly populist Democrats is rising, and they're winning. Zohran Mamdani won the New York City mayor's race on an aggressively anti-billionaire, pro-working-class platform, defeating the Democratic establishment's preferred candidates. James Tallarico, running for Senate in Texas, ran a Super Bowl ad, the Super Bowl, saying, and I'm paraphrasing here, that billionaires don't just influence politicians, they own them, and he refuses corporate PAC money. Bernie Sanders' former staffers are winning races in places like affluent New Jersey suburbs that used to be safe Republican territory. This is not the Democratic Party of 10 years ago. The economic populism that Bernie Sanders almost won the presidency with is now going mainstream within the Democratic Party. And the message is resonating across different kinds of communities, not just urban progressives, but suburban voters exhausted by economic anxiety and a system that seems to only reward the already wealthy. NPR captured the core difference between the two populisms well. For the right, the pitchfork is pointed at immigrants and liberal elites. For the left, it's pointed at corporations and billionaires. Same anger, different targets.
Spend a moment with the data, because I think the numbers here are genuinely jaw-dropping, and they tell you everything about why populism isn't a fringe movement. It is the mainstream. Only 32% of Americans believe the country's best days are still ahead. Less than a third. Think about what that means. For most of American history, optimism about the future has been almost baked into the national identity. The idea that things will be better for your kids than they were for you, that's the American dream. And right now, 2/3 of the country doesn't believe it anymore. Public confidence in major American institutions, as tracked by Gallup since 1979, has never been lower across the board. Congress, the media, the presidency, the courts, banks, all of them are operating at historic lows of public trust. This isn't a partisan problem. Republicans, Democrats, and independents all share this distrust to varying degrees. 66% of Americans say they need a strong leader to take the country back from the rich and powerful. 63% say that experts in this country don't understand the lives of ordinary people. And 60% say the main divide in society is no longer between left and right, liberal and conservative. It's between ordinary citizens and the political and economic elite. This last point is crucial. The left versus right framework that has defined American politics for generations is cracking. A growing number of Americans don't primarily see themselves as Democrats or Republicans. They see themselves as outsiders versus a political class that has stopped serving them. That is populism in its purest form, and it is reshaping the entire battlefield of American politics. So if the old political order is crumbling, who is stepping into the vacuum? Who are the new faces of this populist moment? On the right, beyond Trump himself, the MAGA movement continues to produce candidates who blend economic nationalism, cultural grievance, and anti-establishment rhetoric into a potent political cocktail. The test for 2026 will be whether MAGA candidates can maintain their coalition at a moment when the president's approval ratings are sliding and the cost of living promises remain unfulfilled. On the left, the names to watch are genuinely diverse and represent something new in Democratic politics. Zohran Mamdani has gone from city council member to mayor of New York City and is now a national figure with a democratic socialist platform that doesn't shy away from confronting wealth and power directly. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez remains one of the most prominent voices tying economic inequality to structural political failure. Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger, more of a centrist, also made economic concerns the core of her platform, showing that the populist economic message can work across ideological lanes within the Democratic Party. And then there are the insurgents, people running against the Democratic establishment from within, in primaries, in down-ballot races, who are refusing corporate PAC money, calling out the financial system directly, and winning in places that Democrats haven't won in a long time. A decade after Bernie Sanders almost tore the presidential nomination out of the hands of the Democratic establishment, his political legacy is finally bearing fruit, not in his own campaign, but in an entire generation of candidates who learned from him. What all of these figures share, regardless of party, is a willingness to say out loud what many Americans have been feeling for a long time. The system is not working for you. The people in charge have failed, and something has to change.
All of this is setting up what could be a genuinely historic midterm election cycle. Midterms are always, at some level, a referendum on the sitting president, and right now, President Trump's numbers are not good. His overall approval rating sits around 38%. His economic approval is even lower, at around 31 to 36%. History tells us that when a president's approval is this low, the opposing party tends to make significant gains in Congress, and current polling suggests that Democrats are well positioned to flip the House of Representatives in 2026. The Senate picture is more complicated. Republicans control more favorable terrain in Senate races this cycle, but the House is genuinely in play. But the midterms aren't just about which party wins. They're also about what kind of politicians within each party are winning. And this is where the internal battle within the Democratic Party becomes critical. The fight between the corporate-friendly centrist establishment and the new populist insurgents will play out in primaries across the country. If the populist wing continues its winning streak in primaries, the Democratic Party that emerges from 2026 could look very different from the one that exists today. On the Republican side, the question is whether Trump's base stays energized enough to hold the Senate, and whether Republicans can successfully deflect blame for rising costs and economic anxiety onto Democrats, immigrants, and the deep state. The populist playbook requires constant enemies. If Trump can't credibly point to external threats, the internal contradiction of billionaires running an anti-elite government becomes more visible and more politically damaging. Political ad spending is expected to set a new record in 2026, a sign of just how much is at stake and how engaged both parties are. The airwaves, the social media feeds, and yes, the YouTube channels will be flooded with populist messaging from both directions. Now, here's the part of the conversation that I think is most important and most honest. Because populism makes great speeches and great YouTube videos, but does it actually govern well? Does it deliver results? The honest answer is, it depends. Researchers have found that anti-establishment rhetoric alone cannot fix problems caused by unpopular or unrealistic policy positions. A candidate can ride the populist wave to power, but once in office, the structural realities of governing are stubborn. Prices are hard to control. Immigration is complex. Healthcare is expensive. The economy is global. These aren't problems that go away because you gave a fiery speech about the elites. Trump's second term is already illustrating this tension. He came in with a mandate, real, legitimate anger from millions of Americans about the cost of living. He promised to lower costs. Instead, tariffs and other policies have created economic uncertainty, and the costs that working Americans feel every day at the grocery store haven't gone down. His approval on the economy has hit historic lows. The populist promise met the messy reality of governing, and so far, the math isn't working out.
On the left, Zohran Mamdani faces a similar test. He won New York City's mayoral race on bold promises about housing affordability, corporate accountability, and economic justice. Now he has to deliver. And New York City is one of the most complex, expensive, politically contentious cities in the world to govern. Promises made on the campaign trail will be measured against results on the ground. The left feels let down by the Democratic Party itself, in part because of years of promised change that never materialized. There's also a deeper philosophical tension at the heart of populism. The Brookings Institution has pointed out what it calls the paradox of populism, the irony that many of the democratic reforms designed to increase public participation and reduce elite control have actually made governance less effective and more vulnerable to demagogues. Professional intermediaries, experienced politicians, experts, career civil servants are often dismissed by populists as the establishment, but it turns out those intermediaries also served important functions, filtering out bad ideas, moderating extreme positions, maintaining institutional knowledge. When you tear down the establishment wholesale, you don't always get the will of the people. Sometimes you just get chaos. Furthermore, anti-establishment sentiment is not the same as support for radical policies. Polling consistently shows that while Americans are furious at the system, large majorities still hold positive views of capitalism and negative views of socialism. They want the system fixed, not replaced. The populist politician who mistakes broad anti-elite anger for a mandate for ideological revolution tends to overstep and pay a political price for it.
So after all of this, the history, the data, the rising figures, the contradictions, what does any of this actually mean for you, the person watching this video? A few things. First, understand that the political labels of left and right are increasingly inadequate to describe what's actually happening in American politics. The more useful framework right now is insider versus outsider, establishment versus anti-establishment. When you're evaluating a politician, the first question to ask is not, are they a Democrat or a Republican? It's, who do they actually work for, and who are they actually fighting against? Second, be skeptical of simple enemies. Populism works by identifying clear villains: immigrants, billionaires, the deep state, corporate elites, liberal professors, coastal elites. These narratives are emotionally satisfying because they give you someone to blame. But the real problems driving American anxiety, stagnant wages, unaffordable housing, broken health care, student debt, don't have simple villains. They have structural causes that require difficult, complex solutions. Any politician who promises an easy fix by taking down the bad guys is probably selling you something. Third, pay attention to what politicians actually do, not just what they say. The gap between populist rhetoric and populist governance is wide. Look at the policy record. Look at who's funding the campaigns. Look at who's in the room when the decisions get made. In politics, more than almost any other field, actions speak louder than words. Fourth, and this is important, don't let rage be the only thing driving your political choices. Populism runs on anger. It needs you to be furious. But anger, while it can be a legitimate and appropriate response to injustice, is also a tool that can be used against you. When you're angry, you're more likely to accept simple explanations, trust charismatic outsiders, and overlook uncomfortable contradictions. The most powerful thing you can do as a voter is stay informed, stay skeptical, and hold every politician, left or right, to the same standards. We are living through a genuinely extraordinary political moment. The United States is heading toward its 250th birthday, and a majority of its citizens believe it's broken. Trust in institutions is at historic lows. The cost of living is squeezing families to the breaking point, and two political parties that used to offer radically different visions of the future are now both standing on the same platform. The system is corrupt. I will fix it, just pointing at different enemies.
Anti-establishment populism is not going away. It is the dominant political current of our time, and it will shape the 2026 midterms, the 2028 presidential race, and likely the decade beyond. Understanding it, really understanding it, not just accepting the version your preferred side is selling, is the most important act of civic awareness you can engage in right now. The question America faces is not whether the system needs change. It clearly does. The question is whether the change we get will actually serve ordinary people, or whether it will, once again, simply replace one set of elites with another, while the forgotten men and women of this country are left standing at the gas station, staring at the pump, wondering why nothing ever gets better. That's the Tarmac truth for today. I hope this gave you something real to think about. If it did, hit the like button. It genuinely helps more people find this channel. Subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below. Do you think populism can actually deliver, or is it always just a campaign strategy? I want to hear your take. Until next time, stay curious, stay honest, and keep asking the hard questions. This is Truth and Tarmac. I'll see you on the road.